You sit there watching other people build friendships so effortlessly, while every connection you try to hold on to somehow slips through your fingers. At first, you blamed yourself. Maybe you were too quiet. Maybe you were too intense. Maybe you cared too much. Maybe you expected too much. You replayed conversations in your mind, wondering which sentence ruined everything. You questioned your personality, your appearance, your worth. You watched people who once seemed excited to know you slowly become distant, and what hurt the most was not that they left, but that they never explained why. You carried their silence like evidence against yourself. Some nights you even prayed that God would simply let you fit in somewhere. Not to become famous, not to become admired, just to belong. Just to have one place where you could stop feeling like the outsider. Yet every time you thought you had finally found your people, something unexpected happened. Relationships cooled. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations became shallow. Doors quietly closed. You began wondering if you were somehow cursed to walk through life unseen. Deep inside, there was a question you barely dared to ask because it frightened you. God, if you love me, why does it seem like you keep taking people away from me? Why do you allow me to feel hidden when everyone else appears to be moving forward together? Those questions are heavier than most people realize because they are usually asked in silence. You smile around others while secretly wondering why your heart feels so isolated. You celebrate everyone else's blessings while wondering if heaven somehow overlooked your name. You keep showing kindness even after being misunderstood. You keep forgiving even after being forgotten. You keep praying even when the answers seem delayed. And somewhere along the way, you begin believing that maybe being hidden means being abandoned. But what if the loneliness you have been interpreting as rejection is not rejection at all? What if what feels like absence is actually protection? What if God is doing something so quiet that you cannot recognize it while you are living through it? Before your heart dismisses that possibility, think about how often the greatest works of God happened long before anyone else noticed them. Seeds grow beneath the soil before anyone celebrates the harvest. Rivers carve mountains while nobody is watching. Character is formed in places where applause cannot reach. Perhaps your story has been unfolding in the same hidden places. There are seasons when God does not immediately increase your visibility because He is first strengthening your identity. If your identity depends on being accepted by people who cannot recognize your purpose, then every rejection will convince you that your life has no meaning. But if your identity begins resting in the one who formed you before anyone knew your name, then even painful seasons begin to look different. Suddenly, the question changes from, "Why am I hidden?" to "What is God preserving inside me while I cannot yet see the reason?" Think back to moments when you desperately wanted certain friendships to last forever. You begged God not to let them end. You thought losing those people would destroy you. Yet months or years later, you realized those same relationships were leading you toward compromises you never intended to make. They encouraged parts of you that God was quietly trying to heal. They celebrated the version of you that was driven by fear instead of faith. At the time, losing them felt like punishment. Looking back, it began to resemble rescue. That realization does not erase the pain. It simply gives the pain another meaning. If this season feels familiar to you, leave a comment saying, "I understand." Sometimes simply admitting that you are walking through this hidden season reminds someone else that they are not carrying this burden alone. There are people listening right now who have cried the same quiet tears, asked the same silent questions, and wondered whether God had forgotten their address. Perhaps your honesty becomes the encouragement they have been praying for. One of the hardest truths to accept is that not everyone who is attracted to your personality is prepared for your purpose. Some people enjoy your company as long as you remain small enough to make them comfortable. Others appreciate your kindness until your growth begins exposing their unwillingness to change. Some celebrate your potential until your obedience to God requires boundaries they never expected. That is why not every closed door should be interpreted as spiritual failure. Sometimes the door closes because your future cannot survive inside the room you desperately wanted to stay in. Imagine carrying a precious treasure through a crowded marketplace. If everyone knew what you were carrying, how many people would try to take it? How many would misuse it? How many would damage it simply because they did not understand its value? In much the same way, there are seasons when God allows your gifts, your calling, your wisdom, and even your influence to remain unnoticed because they are still being protected. Hidden things are often valuable things. We naturally protect what matters most. Parents protect newborn children because they are vulnerable. Gardeners protect young plants because they are fragile. Builders cover foundations before the beautiful house becomes visible. Protection often looks surprisingly similar to limitation until enough time has passed for understanding to grow. Perhaps this explains why you have repeatedly felt overlooked, even when you knew you had something meaningful to offer. Perhaps your frustration has not come from lacking purpose, but from expecting purpose to arrive through public recognition instead of quiet preparation. God often develops what the world overlooks, because once people begin applauding, it becomes much harder to hear His voice. During hidden seasons, there are fewer distractions, fewer expectations, fewer opportunities to confuse popularity with purpose. Hiddenness teaches lessons that visibility never can. It teaches endurance when nobody notices your faithfulness. It teaches humility when nobody applauds your sacrifices. It teaches trust when your circumstances provide no visible evidence that anything is changing. Those lessons rarely feel exciting while you are learning them. They often feel lonely. Yet they become the invisible strength supporting every future blessing God entrusts to your life. There is another reason hidden seasons hurt so deeply. Human hearts naturally connect love with attention. We assume that if someone values us, they will constantly notice us. That belief quietly shapes the way many people approach God as well. If He loves me, surely He will make everything obvious. Surely He will remove every obstacle. Surely He will explain every delay. Yet throughout Scripture, we repeatedly see faithful people walking through long periods where heaven appeared silent, while God was actually preparing something much greater than they could imagine. Silence did not mean absence. Delay did not mean neglect. Hiddenness did not mean rejection. It meant that the story was still unfolding beyond what human eyes could yet understand. You may have spent years trying to become more acceptable to people who were never meant to accompany you into your next season. You adjusted your personality. You minimized your convictions. You laughed when you wanted to cry. You agreed when you wanted to speak honestly. You carried burdens that were never yours simply because you feared being alone. Yet, despite all your efforts, many of those relationships still faded away. What if that happened, not because you failed, but because pretending could only last for so long? Eventually, the person God is shaping inside you becomes incompatible with environments that require you to abandon your authenticity. That transition often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. It feels like isolation before it feels like peace. It feels like confusion before it becomes clarity. Somewhere inside your heart, there is probably still a younger version of yourself, waiting for everyone to finally understand you. That longing is deeply human. We all want to be seen. We all want someone to recognize the parts of ourselves we struggle to explain. Yet sometimes God gently leads us beyond, depending on human understanding as the foundation of our identity. Not because relationships do not matter, but because no human being can carry the weight of becoming your ultimate source of security. That place belongs to Him alone. As painful as this season has been, perhaps it has also revealed something beautiful. Despite everything you have lost, despite every unanswered prayer, despite every relationship that ended unexpectedly, despite every lonely night and every silent question, you are still searching for God instead of running from Him. You are still hoping even when hope feels fragile. You are still believing that your life carries meaning, even though you cannot yet see the entire picture. That quiet perseverance may be one of the greatest miracles taking place inside you right now. You may feel hidden from people, but you are not hidden from the God who sees every tear before it falls, hears every prayer before it is spoken aloud, and understands every fear you have struggled to explain. Perhaps what feels like being forgotten is actually being carefully guarded until the people, places, and responsibilities ahead are prepared to receive the person you are still becoming. And perhaps the most surprising discovery waiting on the other side of this hidden season is not simply that God was protecting your future from the wrong people, but that He was also protecting your heart from becoming attached to places where your purpose could never fully grow. There comes a point in every hidden season when the pain changes. At first it hurts because people leave. Later, it hurts because you begin expecting them to leave before they even have the chance. You stop opening your heart the way you once did. You become careful with your words. You convince yourself that if you never become too attached, you will never be disappointed again. Without realizing it, rejection begins shaping your expectations more than hope does. You still smile. You still encourage others. You still pray. But somewhere beneath all of that, you quietly prepare yourself for another goodbye. That is one of the deepest wounds loneliness creates. It is not simply the absence of people. It is the fear that every meaningful connection is temporary. If you have ever found yourself thinking, "Why should I get close to anyone if they will eventually disappear?" then you know exactly what this feels like. Yet God never intended for disappointment to become the lens through which you interpret every future relationship. He knows rejection leaves scars, but he also knows scars can either become reminders of his healing or prisons that keep you from receiving the people he will eventually place in your life. This is why hidden seasons are not only about removing the wrong people. They are also about healing the parts of you that would struggle to trust the right ones. Imagine trying to pour clean water into a cracked vessel. The water is good, but the vessel cannot hold it. Sometimes we ask God to bring lasting relationships while he is gently repairing the places inside us that still leak fear, insecurity, comparison, or the need for constant approval. We often think we are waiting for people, while God is preparing our hearts to recognize them when they arrive. That preparation rarely happens through comfort. It happens through quiet conversations with him that no one else ever hears. It happens during mornings when you wake up carrying a heaviness you cannot explain. It happens while driving home after spending time with a crowd that somehow made you feel even more alone. It happens when you sit in church, surrounded by believers, yet wonder why your heart still feels disconnected. Those are sacred moments, even when they feel painfully ordinary. God often accomplishes his deepest work where there is no audience. Consider how many times you have prayed for answers and received only silence. Silence can feel unbearable because it forces you to remain with questions longer than you want. But silence also reveals what constant noise keeps hidden. In quiet places, your fears become visible. Your motives become clearer. Your dependence is exposed. You begin discovering whether you have been seeking God's presence or simply seeking relief from discomfort. Those discoveries are not meant to shame you. They are invitations into a deeper relationship with him. There is a difference between asking God to remove loneliness and asking him to meet you inside it. The first prayer asks him to change your surroundings. The second allows him to transform your soul. Sometimes he lovingly does both, but often he begins with the second because a transformed heart can flourish even before circumstances change. Think about the people throughout Scripture who spent significant portions of their lives in hidden places. There were shepherds before there were kings. There were deserts before there were promised lands. There were prisons before positions of influence. There were years of quiet obedience before public purpose. None of those hidden places were wasted. They shaped character that success alone never could. Had those seasons been removed, much of the strength that later sustained them would never have existed. The same pattern may be unfolding in ways you cannot yet recognize. You may wonder why opportunities keep slipping away, why conversations that seemed so promising suddenly end, why certain people become distant without explanation, why doors close just as you begin feeling hopeful again. While it would be unwise to assume every disappointment is directly orchestrated by God, it is deeply biblical to trust that he is able to work through every circumstance for the good of those who love him. Even what others intended carelessly or what life simply brought unexpectedly can become material in the hands of a faithful Creator. He is able to redeem what he did not necessarily cause. That truth changes everything, because it means your story is never defined solely by what happened to you. It is also defined by what God is able to produce within you through it. One of the greatest dangers during hidden seasons is comparison. You scroll through photographs of smiling families, successful careers, close friendships, engagements, celebrations, and answered prayers. Everyone else's life appears to be moving while yours feels paused. You begin measuring God's faithfulness by someone else's timeline. Without noticing, gratitude slowly gives way to resentment. Hope begins giving way to exhaustion. Comparison whispers that if God truly loved you, your story would look like theirs. But comparison ignores something essential. You are comparing visible chapters of someone else's journey with invisible chapters of your own. You cannot see what they have survived. They cannot see what God is quietly doing inside you. Every calling carries unique preparation. Every life unfolds according to circumstances known fully only to God. The temptation to compare becomes strongest precisely when you are forgetting that your value has never depended on keeping pace with another person's journey. If these words describe a season you have lived through, share your experience in the comments. Someone else may read your story and realize they are not the only one wondering why life has unfolded this way. Sometimes the testimony you hesitate to share becomes the answer to another person's silent prayer. Hidden seasons often convince us that our experiences have no purpose until they are over. Yet even now, your perseverance may already be strengthening someone you have never met. There is another painful reality many people rarely discuss. Sometimes the wrong people are not obviously harmful. They may even be kind. They may genuinely care about you. They may sincerely wish you well. Yet despite all of that, they are still not meant to walk with you into every chapter of your life. We often imagine the wrong people as cruel, manipulative, or dishonest. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they are simply people whose direction no longer aligns with where God is leading you. Letting go of those relationships can be especially painful because there is no dramatic betrayal to justify the distance. There is only the quiet realization that remaining together would require one or both of you to stop growing. Growth itself creates separation. A child eventually outgrows clothing that once fit perfectly. The clothing was not bad. It simply belonged to another season. In the same way, some relationships fit who you once were, but cannot contain who you are becoming. Accepting that truth requires maturity, because it means releasing the need to blame someone for every ending. Some endings happen because seasons change. God's wisdom often appears gentler than we expect. Instead of forcing dramatic exits, He sometimes allows relationships to slowly fade so both people can continue walking the paths prepared for them. While your heart experiences loss, His larger perspective sees purpose beyond what you can currently understand. Have you noticed that some of your deepest conversations with God happened after disappointment rather than success? There is something about broken expectations that strips away superficial faith. Suddenly, prayers become honest. You stop trying to impress God with polished words because pain has made pretense impossible. You tell Him exactly how confused you are, exactly how tired you feel, exactly how much you wish things were different. Those prayers may feel weak, but they are often the beginning of profound intimacy with Him. God is never threatened by your honesty. He already knows every thought before it reaches your lips. The Psalms remind us again and again that faithful people brought confusion, grief, frustration, fear, and longing into God's presence. They did not hide behind perfect language. They trusted Him enough to be real. Perhaps your hidden season has been teaching you that kind of honesty. Perhaps God has been inviting you into a relationship built not on appearances but on authenticity. You have spent so much energy trying to convince others that you are strong. Maybe God is showing you that true strength is found in dependence rather than performance. You do not have to earn His attention. You do not have to compete for His affection. You do not have to become someone else before He draws near. He has seen every version of you, including the one that cries when nobody else is watching. He has remained faithful through every unanswered question, every anxious night, every moment when your faith felt fragile. Even now, while you still wonder why certain people disappeared from your life, God sees the complete picture that remains hidden from your perspective. The people you lost are only one part of the story. The person you are becoming is another. And sometimes that second story is far more important than the first, because long after names fade from memory, the character God formed within you will continue shaping every relationship, every decision, every act of kindness, and every step of faith for the rest of your life. Perhaps one day you will look back and realize that God was never trying to make your world smaller. He was making room for something deeper than temporary acceptance. He was teaching you that being hidden is not the same as being forgotten. Being protected is not the same as being rejected, and being alone for a season is not the same as being abandoned forever. The hidden place where your heart has spent so many difficult days may become the very place where you eventually recognize that God's quiet faithfulness was surrounding you all along, even when you could not yet see His hand at work. Perhaps the hardest part of a hidden season is realizing that it changes you in ways you never expected. You begin noticing things that other people overlook. You become more sensitive to pain because you have lived with your own. You recognize loneliness in someone's eyes before they ever mention it. You become slower to judge because you know what it feels like to be misunderstood. Without realizing it, the very experiences you once begged God to remove begin shaping a heart that reflects more of His compassion. At first, that feels unfair. You wonder why your greatest lessons had to come through your deepest wounds. Why could growth not have arrived through easier paths? Why did understanding have to be purchased with tears? Those questions are deeply human, and Scripture never asks us to pretend they do not exist. Yet over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The pain that once threatened to harden your heart slowly becomes the place where God's gentleness grows strongest. You discover that the people who carry the greatest peace are often those who have survived seasons where peace seemed impossible. You meet someone whose quiet wisdom immediately comforts you, and only later do you discover they have walked through losses you cannot imagine. Suddenly you understand that spiritual maturity is rarely produced by comfort alone. It is formed when a person continues trusting God while carrying questions that have not yet been answered. That is the kind of faith the hidden season has been cultivating inside you. Not a faith built upon constant explanations, but a faith that quietly whispers, "I still believe you are good, even when I cannot yet understand what you are doing." That kind of trust is not dramatic. It rarely receives attention, yet it becomes the steady foundation beneath every future storm. There may come a day when someone enters your life and treats you with the kindness you prayed for years ago. They may listen without trying to fix you. They may encourage you without expecting something in return. They may respect the boundaries that others ignored. In that moment, you may suddenly realize why so many previous relationships had to end. Not because those people were all evil, but because they had become the standard you thought you deserved. God was quietly refusing to let your definition of love be shaped by inconsistency, manipulation, neglect, or conditional acceptance. He was teaching you that love rooted in His character looks different. It is patient without being passive, honest without being cruel, faithful without becoming controlling, gentle without becoming weak. During your hidden season, He was not only protecting you from the wrong people, He was protecting your understanding of what healthy love truly looks like. If the wrong people had remained, you might have mistaken familiarity for faithfulness. You might have confused attention with genuine care. You might have accepted relationships that slowly pulled your heart away from the person God was forming you to become. There is another truth that often goes unnoticed. Sometimes God hides the chosen because visibility before maturity becomes a burden instead of a blessing. We often ask for influence, opportunities, recognition, or greater responsibility without realizing that every gift carries weight. A tree that grows too quickly without deep roots is easily broken by the first strong wind. A building that rises without a solid foundation becomes dangerous long before it becomes impressive. In the same way, a person whose public life grows faster than their private character eventually discovers that success cannot sustain what integrity has not prepared. Perhaps you have wondered why certain opportunities never happened when you were convinced you were ready. Perhaps you watched someone else receive the position you desired, the recognition you hoped for, or the relationship you prayed about. Your first reaction may have been disappointment, yet years from now you may recognize that God's delays were never designed to diminish you. They were designed to establish you. He knew what you would eventually carry even when you did not. He knew the pressure, the expectations, the temptations, and the responsibilities that would come with it. Because He loves you, He refused to rush your preparation simply to satisfy your impatience. Think about how often Jesus Himself withdrew from crowds. Although many people sought Him, He repeatedly stepped away into quiet places to pray. He understood that constant attention without constant communion with the Father would eventually exhaust even the strongest person. If the Son of God embraced hidden moments of solitude, perhaps we should not be surprised that God sometimes leads his children into seasons where the crowd becomes quieter. Solitude is not always a punishment. Sometimes it is an invitation to hear God's voice more clearly than the noise around you, an invitation to discover that your worth remains unchanged, whether people applaud you or overlook you, an invitation to become rooted so deeply in his presence that your peace no longer depends upon the opinions of those around you. Maybe you have spent years asking God to send more people into your life when the deeper prayer should have been, Lord, help me become the person you created me to be, whether many people understand me or only a few do. That prayer changes everything, because it shifts your attention from chasing acceptance to pursuing faithfulness. It reminds you that your assignment is not to convince everyone of your value. Your assignment is to walk faithfully with the one who already knows it completely. As this message reaches your heart, perhaps you can already think of names that still carry pain, people you expected would stay forever, friends whose absence still feels strange, family members who no longer understand you, relationships that ended with unanswered questions. You may never receive every explanation you hoped for. Some conversations will never happen. Some apologies may never come. Some misunderstandings may remain unresolved for the rest of your life. That reality can feel deeply unfair. Yet forgiveness does not require complete understanding. Peace does not always require complete closure. Sometimes healing begins the moment you entrust what you cannot resolve into God's hands instead of carrying it alone. If this message has reminded you of how faithfully God has carried you through seasons you once thought would break you, share that testimony in the comments. Someone reading your words may still be standing where you once stood, wondering if the hidden season will ever end. Your story may become the encouragement that gives them the strength to keep trusting one more day. As you continue walking forward, remember this. Not every empty chair at your table represents a tragedy. Not every closed door represents failure. Not every delayed answer represents God's absence. Some empty spaces exist because God is making room. Some closed doors exist because he sees dangers your heart cannot yet recognize. Some delays exist because he refuses to exchange lasting fruit for temporary satisfaction. Faith often means believing that God's perspective is greater than your present understanding. One day, you may look back over your life and notice a pattern you cannot currently see. You will remember the friendships that unexpectedly faded, the opportunities that disappeared, the invitations that never came, the dreams that seemed postponed, and the lonely nights that made no sense. Instead of seeing disconnected disappointments, you may recognize a loving Father quietly weaving together a story of protection, refinement, and purpose. You may realize that had every prayer been answered exactly when you wanted, you would have become connected to people who celebrated a version of you that God never intended to preserve. You would have remained in environments where your spiritual growth slowly weakened. You would have mistaken comfort for calling. Instead, God loved you enough to allow temporary loneliness rather than permanent compromise. The hidden season has never been proof that you are unwanted. It has never been evidence that God overlooked your prayers. It has never meant that your future disappeared. More often than you realize, it has been the place where your deepest roots have grown. The world celebrates what is visible, but God treasures what is faithful. While others measure success by recognition, he measures it by transformation. While others admire appearances, he looks at the heart. And while you worried that being unseen meant your life was standing still, heaven was quietly accomplishing work inside you that no human eye could measure. So if you wake up tomorrow and your circumstances have not yet changed, do not assume that nothing is happening. Continue praying even when the answers seem slow. Continue loving even after disappointment. Continue choosing integrity when compromise appears easier. Continue trusting that the God who formed you has not forgotten where he placed you. The hidden season will not last forever, but the character it produces can bless every season that follows. One day, when the right people finally enter your life, they will not simply meet the person you once were. They will meet the person God patiently shaped while almost no one else was watching. And perhaps that is why he hid you from the wrong people for so long. Not to keep love from you, but to prepare you to receive and give it in a way that reflects his faithfulness far more deeply than you ever imagined.